Welcome back into Talking Fitchburg. Joining me this afternoon is Adrienne. She's from the Fitchburg Historical Society, and we're talking about a great upcoming event. You guys always have a spring and a fall event where you kind of have a special topic, and this one, as all of them have been very relevant, but this one in particular stands out because you guys are talking about the flu. We'll talk about that event here in just a minute. But part of this is you guys will be highlighting the lowlights, I guess you could say, of the 1918 flu pandemic. And you're going to summarize a little bit of that flu pandemic, as it were.
Yes, I am, and thank you for having me again.
Oh, I appreciate it.
It's nice to be here. It's kind of sad to have to talk about a sad event, but it is historically relevant.
Absolutely.
So, 100 years ago this year, there was a flu pandemic in 1918, and it was a very overwhelming event because it affected both people around the world, both soldiers and civilians. So it had a tremendous impact on lifestyle. And the Fitchburg Historical Society is remembering this event by including it as part of our annual meeting in April. And it will be, we are partnering with the Dane County Historical Society to bring a speaker from the University of Wisconsin Pharmacy School to talk about the flu pandemic and current flu involvement. So 100 years later, this historic event is still being spoken of because it's on the tips of our tongue every day.
Yeah, this year, has been, again, unfortunately, a horrific flu season. And when you look back to the 1918 one, it's got some similarities to it, but also had a mix of some other things. I want you to tell me some details from what you've found.
First of all, I do want to mention that usually the flu, first of all, the flu is an Italian word, and the flu usually happens in the winter only. And the 1918 one was so overwhelming because it happened throughout the entire year.
Oh, wow.
And it dragged on and, of course, involved a lot of people. And the word pandemic means world involvement. It was not just happening in one place, it happened everywhere.
That's not good.
No, of course it's not good. I do want to say before I get started in giving you a summary of what's happening, because I would like the people out there to know a little bit about it before they come to our meeting. There is still confusion as to where it started and when it started. Depending on the historical text you're reading, it started here, it started there, it lasted this long, it lasted that long. So I'm just going to give you a framework of the basics so that you have some understanding of why it was such a big problem back then. First of all, the flu was affected by the fact that World War I was happening at the same time. And so World War I and the fighting, etc., affected how the flu was handled. And with any war, there was censorship. And the people on the ground in the battlefields and the administrators of the countries that were fighting kept the totals or the tallies of people who were affected by the flu low so that it would not reflect negatively on their trying to finish the war and complete battles. So the data about how many people died is very nebulous because the findings are not there, and that's part of the war was a big cause. However, Spain was an unaligned neutral country during World War I, and their people got the flu. So they were not part of the World War censorship, and they publicized the fact that the flu was happening in their country. So the flu became the Spanish flu, even though the people in Spain didn't have any special variety of the flu to deal with. They were dealing with the same old flu as everyone else, but they publicized the fact that their people were sick and dying. So that was one of the big factors about how you get information about this, because as each country was involved, they had different results. What are some of the reasons that the flu happened? Well, they think malnourishment of the soldiers because they had mustard gas attacks on their bodies during the war. The camps were huge. There were numerous people involved in one location at the same time. And general hygiene was poor. People didn't know much about germs and what caused medical problems, so they weren't concerned about it. And this was a very large contact disease. If you sneezed on someone or touched someone, you did spread the disease very quickly. So I have some examples. There were two waves to the flu. The first wave happened from about March 1918 through the end of the summer. In the United States, in March 1918, soldiers at Camp Fort Riley, Kansas, got the flu to the, it's in a 3-day period, they went from 2 or 3 people being ill to 500 plus people being ill. And by the end of that week, the flu had spread from Kansas to New York and other locations within the United States. And it is felt all around the world that the advances in travel and the extent of traveling that was needed to carry on business and to carry out the war affected how the flu was spread also.
That's how it kind of became worldwide.
Yes,
as it was.
exactly.
That's interesting. That's interesting.
You know, airplanes were in vogue. People traveled more than they did before. They had automobiles rather than carriages, et cetera, et cetera. So it spread quickly. In Europe, in early 1918, it's not even known how many cases of the flu there were, because the flu cases were happening on the battlefield. And it affected the battles. It affected how the battles were carried out, how long they were, et cetera. Then there was a quiescent period where the number of cases were reduced, so they didn't think too much of the severity of it in early 1918. However, about late September, early October, the second wave happened, and that was the horrific part of the flu for 1918. The second wave happened, and for example, in Boston, where troops were coming back from Europe after they had served, the Army camps along the eastern seaboard were completely overwhelmed by cases of flu. The doctors didn't know quick enough what to do and how to do it, or what the medical limitations were to try and prevent the illness from advancing. So it spread to the East Coast cities very quickly, but then it also spread to other parts of the world rather than just the area of the Northern Hemisphere where the World War was happening. So now it was in China, it was in South America, it was in Alaska. They found people in igloos in Alaska that were just dead inside the igloo because people didn't even know they were sick. It was noted to be in the Pacific Islands like American Samoa, etc. So it became the worldwide pandemic after the second wave of infection. And the second wave really affected the economy, the social structure, and the lifestyle of the people of that time, because they had to deal with wearing masks, protecting themselves from infection, dealing with family members that died overnight. Beside being severe with mortality, the second wave flu was harder on the body. It caused instant infection in a few days rather than a few weeks. And there were mass graves to deal with the fact that there were so many people that had died. There were closures of common community buildings. There were closures of businesses. There weren't enough farm workers to do farm work. Everything was affected by the severity of the second wave of the flu in 1918. And then, as suddenly as it started at the end of October, by the end of November and early part of December, it was over with, and it started to taper off again, and then completely ended by 1919.
So in 1 year, it came about, maybe went sort of dormant, but then hit a second wave of that just was unbelievable. And I'm sure you take into account for people being sick the first time around, and then low immune system and everything else in between. Certainly, Adrienne, we would love to keep going, but we got to wrap it up. We got to have people come out to this event. Let me mention this real quick here, that this event's coming up on Sunday, April 22nd at 1:30 p.m. Again, you've got a professor from UW Pharmacy School.
Right. We have
in.
Professor Mary Haney, an exceedingly qualified woman who is dealing with immunization problems and the flu itself now. So she'll be able to tie in the link between what happened 100 years ago and now.
And this
The
year.
title of her presentation is 1918 Flu Pandemic and Dealing with the Flu Today.
Yeah, very relevant. I certainly appreciate you taking the time to research this, and looking forward to the presentation coming up here in April. So thank you so much. We've got to wrap it up, unfortunately, but we'll get you back on the show for another topic.
Thank you.
All right, we'll take a quick break. This is Talking Fitchburg.